Why are we surprised by death? Personally speaking, it's a daily part of my life. My favorite TV shows, movies, and books are horror and dark dramas. My dad and my brother are both ministers, so funerals and graveyards are deeply rooted in my life. And speaking of my life, I live it very cautiously so that nothing will accidentally happen to me. But I still lay awake at night, thinking about my mortality, wondering how death will come knocking at my door, and what that will mean for the me that outlasts my body. So why then, if every moment is spent thinking about death, was I surprised to find out that Lester died? My grandpa had been in bad shape for years. His health was worsening, and a few weeks before his death, he had heart failure and was stuck in a hospital. After a few days, he was sent to a home, and we all kind of felt that this was the end for him. But when I got the call a few days later, I was shocked, and I've been trying to figure out why. I'm not saying this is the answer, but I feel like as humans, we generally have a "it won't happen to me" complex. It's the reason I haven't been to the doctor in a very long time. It's the reason I say, "Oh, no, I'll do it," when one of my film crew is about to climb a 15-foot ladder to install a light. It's not that I don't think I'll fall. It's just in my mind, I can control my own body and my decisions, but I can't control someone else's, and therefore I'm better suited for the task at hand. Which makes perfect sense to me, but zero sense to the rest of the world, because each of us as individuals is the center of our own existence. I know grandparents die, but it's me we're talking about. Lester shouldn't die because my whole life so far he hasn't, and everyone else's grandfathers have. So by the evidence shown before me, it won't happen to me. It's not that we think this way. It's just that in the back of our brains, other people fall off cliffs, but I've never fallen off a cliff, therefore I won't fall off a cliff, are the lyrics to the song playing on repeat at all times. It won't happen to me. We're not insane. We're just human. And what it all boils down to is when things don't go our way, we're utterly surprised, shocked, devastated. And some a-hole says, I mean, what did you think was going to happen? Or you must have seen it coming. But the truth is, we didn't. It's only after they're gone that we can come to grips with the fact that they died. And that is not something we're prepared to face ever, no matter how shocking or predictable it is. I could keep talking about this forever because I'll be dealing with it forever, just like everybody else. So that's why I decided this month will be dedicated to loss, how we deal with it, how we don't deal with it, and everything else that happens when it happens to us. Good evening, world, and welcome to Haunting Season. Before we kick off today's episode, I want to say that the subject of loss is a really heavy one, but we're going to do our best to tackle this subject with levity. We're going to have a good time talking about loss, damn it, even if it kills us. Ain't that right, Cody?
That's exactly right, Joshua. Life is killing us, so we might as well have fun with it.
Yeah. If you're new to the show, that's Cody, my co-host, and I'm Josh, and we have a third person on the show today, a special guest. He's not the beloved pansexual from Schitt's Creek. No, that David Rose is unfortunately fictional, but we do have a real David Rose here, and he's arguably a much better fit for today's show. So David, why don't you introduce yourself to us?
David Rose here, a writer of now weird fiction and horror fantasy. And prior to that, I served in the military and got out of my system some military nonfiction.
We are currently in a time of exceptional loss. COVID-19 surpassed the loss of American lives in World War II this past January. We're pre-recording this episode, so we don't know what the exact numbers will be like in April when this comes out, but they will inevitably be worse than they are now. And so this seems like an opportune time to talk about loss. Personally, I feel like Americans aren't really well equipped for dealing with loss. I think as a country, we tend to feel invincible because of our obsession with freedom and ownership and rite of passage and all that crap. Where do you guys land on all this?
This might not just be the States, but just Western culture. We tend to put mortality on a shelf, like just an inconvenient bill or something. Whereas, you spend time further east. And for a number of reasons, it seems to be a bit more of a person's daily life. I've seen on whatever news channel you want to flip to, you see this death count. And I'd always said, to be honest and to be fair, I think if we just put a death count in general, it would be this sort of stark wake up call to a culture who wants to avoid the topic.
As being like Irish American, funerals are great. I mean, dying is one of the greatest things. Getting hitched or put in a ditch is as a reason to party. There's these celebrations that take place in New Orleans where it's a celebration. It's like, celebrate life. But overall, I think that there is definitely like this American kind of just arrogance that like, hey, if shit happens, move on, whatever. And we're strong enough, we're bold enough, and we'll carry on and carry forward
until it happens to you.
Until it hits you, then it's like, oh, Jack, hit the brakes.
I'm texting with like my cousins. I had my grandfather passed away, and it's really easy to type like, he wasn't doing well for a while, or like, we kind of knew it was coming. But the reality is when it hits because you just think that's not my life. That's what I see on TV, or that's what I see other people dealing with.
Were you Army, Air Force, Marine?
I was in the Marines from 2002 to 2006. One of my first Schitt's Creeks. My contract got screwed with, so I could go to boot camp early, and I wanted to be infantry, and the closest I could get after the fact was artillery, and so I went through all that training, kicked and screamed, and was able to do what's called the recon NDOC, and became a recon Marine for basically my second half of my enlistment. And a recon Marine, I guess you could say in layman's terms, is kind of like a Marine Navy SEAL. It's something that people like to say they are drunk at the bar, but every now and again, you meet one of us with usually an excruciating bad back by 30 that just sort of verifies that we're masochistic enough to go for it.
Well, I appreciate, your service. And did you see any sort of like action? Like this is like between, you said 2002, 2006?
I was in Iraq 2004, 2005, which was the second Battle of Fallujah. And that was statistically, I believe, there were pockets before and after in certain areas, but statistically that was, I believe, the most dangerous time and the most dangerous place at the most dangerous time, that general area. So yeah, I got into only a couple of gunfights, and I say only relative to the fact that we were just constantly hit with indirect fire. People probably haven't heard it in a decade, but years ago on the news, the term IED was ingrained into our national conscience, and we got peppered with mortars and IEDs to where when you got into a gunfight, you're like, okay, at least I can do something.
Yeah,
yeah.
Jesus.
I want to know if you had any experience with PTSD or had buddies who dealt with that coming back.
So when I was 16, I was in a car accident, and it wasn't really a bad wreck, but I remember for like weeks after, if I would be in the passenger seat of a friend's car and he just rolled past a stop bar, I would lose my mind. And it went away after maybe 2-3 weeks. And I remember in Iraq, this sense of invulnerability, until you started to see how vulnerable you really were. And especially again with IEDs, the moment we got hit and you could see what it could do to your vehicle or people, it completely changed the idea of, wow, we're really rolling around here. At any moment you take a little turn and the stress level went up. So I would say that PTSD was there in an acute level, but in the long term, I will say, I think what our society generally calls PTSD is a little bit more complicated than that. Sebastian Junger has a really great book called Tribe that talks about how people coming back from the Peace Corps and other things like that experience such an extreme reverse culture shock that I really believe, at least this is my stance, that some of the things that gets associated with vets and PTSD is a bit more that. It's much more of a transitional thing. I think, the human animal is built to be resilient, and whatever PTSD I personally may have experienced, I do think went away pretty quick.
I don't want to spend too much more time on the military stuff because, like you said, you do a lot of podcasts that's centric to that. But I do have one more question specific to
Absolutely.
it. It feels like in the military, you're talking about the vulnerability that that you realize once you're over there. It seems like in the military they try to not like beat out of you, but like force out of you any sort of weakness or personal feelings from your personality to make you more efficient in wartime scenarios. Does that feel true? And then what was that like going in with that confidence and then having it wiped away?
I kind of liked being stripped of my identity. I joined the military because I had all the energy in the world, but zero direction. I had joined at 19, which was actually, I was one of the oldest people. Can you believe that? So I had already spent a year working away from home and was just struggling in an existential level. And it was kind of nice to not have a name and to just be told what to do. It was kind of a mental holiday. And I'm not saying that's for most people, but from my personal experience, it wasn't that bad. You're right. They do want to pump with steroids this sort of boyish invulnerability and a sense of communalism and lose your individuality for for efficiency purposes. I think depends on the job you do. It is on a spectrum, but it was fun. It was fantastic to be that young and to feel like you're riding this crest of this wave, and then. But yeah, you realize quick that you are vulnerable. And me and my friends who still talk, which is quite a few of us, we're now the vulnerability has shifted to our injuries from the lifestyle we used to live.
You came back and you wrote military stuff and then worked into military fiction stuff and then now are writing this like horror fantasy stuff. And as a writer, I feel like, it's important to be in touch with emotions and all of that. Has your experience in the military affected your ability to write, or did it take some time to get back into that?
I really became a reader in the Marines. And I wrote a lot of journals and just stuff like that, because you really have a lot of downtime. And I'd always been cited sort of the eccentric personality on the margins, like the recon Marine that reads H.P. Lovecraft, or like it wasn't really much of a guy to watch football in the lounge. I was reading Clark Ashton Smith. So that sort of weirdness was always there. It's kind of hard to explain. I think it's fair to say I was trying to be something that I thought I should have been in my 20s, which was this very hyper masculine go-getter because of certain circumstances of how I was raised. But inevitably, I guess you could say my true nature came out around 30 years old, which was that my deepest love is the imagination and certain dark fringes of it. As George Orwell said, I think he said something along the lines of he at some point had to stop outraging his true nature.
How did you bridge that gap between like military fiction and horror?
Military nonfiction was just my sort of way to get into the dance. It was sort of like the first few Pantera albums that were all glam metal until then they're like, okay, now we can kind of do what we really want to do. It was catharsis for me. I had some things I wanted to say. I was fortunate enough to have some friends in social media that liked my writing and were able to give me a platform. And it really started from there. But I knew when I was writing military anything that it was a one and done. I said this, now I said this. Whereas someone who writes horror or dark fantasy, that it's this eternally bubbling well, you know what I mean? So I could basically sum it up as I just needed to get the military writing out of my system to focus on what I really love.
So what do you think it's so important that we as writers talk about loss in our work?
I'm going to try to tie 5 things together here, and it's either going to work or fail miserably. I'll kind of tell you a little bit of a war story. In late 2004, we had a guy get killed by an IED, and he was this prime of life, early mid-20s guy. He was a big gym rat. I mean, he turned his body into this vascular fortress with protein and overhead reps. And I'm not trying to be a good storyteller here per se. I'm hoping in just bald speech, he was just obliterated. The largest part we found in him was his boot, about 6 inches up or below the knee. And I remember again, you got to remember, people process these things in different ways. Me kind of being a guy who reads horror and is a bit of an outsider, my mind processed it the following: is I was like, where is he? You know, almost like an old horror movie where when a person's body is gone, there's like a hologram version of themselves looking around. I thought I was the only weirdo that would think that. A few days later, we had some, you can get liquor in Iraq. Usually family mails it to you in a Listerine bottle. A few days later, we're having a couple drinks back on base. And somebody who wasn't prone to philosophy or literature, he said the exact same thing. He goes, like, where is he now? Moments like that is why something like the ghost and the ghost story has emerged and been sustained in our collective conscious. Is this just being instantly deprived of someone in an untimely fashion, where there's no goodbye? You were just talking to them a second ago, and it's like there's no closure. It was so brief, it was so instant, that it was a wartime experience where I had these revelations as far as why these elements in horror exist and why they're important to talk about.
The everyday experience can even replicate that in a lot of ways, which is why I think we need funerals, and we need the formality of sometimes the wake and seeing the body to be able to release that.
Yeah, I agree.
The things that we write can be so rooted in truth, and they don't have to be expressing the exact experience, but taking what you've lived through and working that into something that's can become so abstract.
Yeah, and it's interesting how that therapy can take shape. An interesting aspect to that same story is that whenever we would hear on the radio, like someone in a brother platoon was injured, you don't mean to do it, but you do this sort of crude utilitarian thing of you do this triage of, okay, I know all these guys in that platoon. Who do I not want it to be? It's this thing that you could almost feel guilty about, but it's like it's a knee-jerk reaction. Like, I got my friend here, and you do this list for eventually at the bottom, there's this pool of guys where you're like, I hope it's not them, but if it is, I can live with it. It's those types of detail dealing with loss that I think people might be ashamed of and uncomfortable with talking about or acknowledging. And I do think that they can be adequately converted into fiction, especially in horror, because it's the space on the shelf where really there's no holds barred. You can put flesh on whatever it is you feel you need to say.
I heard you say like H.P. Lovecraft, but like, what are some of the other like movies, books, people that inspired you? Or maybe there's a song or something or a poem you read, like something that has impacted you.
Yeah, well, horror, as far as music, it's hands down Typo Negative.
Really? Peter Steele?
I love.
Do you really? Black,
I love
black,
Typo
number one. Man.
A buddy of mine once said it best, who was in the Marines. He goes, the cool thing about Peter Steele is he looks exactly like he sounds. The late, great Peter Steele. Music, definitely that. But when it comes to books, I was in 2008. It's like it fell out of the sky. I discovered a book called The Throne of Bones by Brian McNaughton, and it absolutely changed my life. I had a visceral reaction reading the book the way, and I'm not overdoing it here. And I've never found a book that's done this to me like The Throne of Bones. But I felt my brain moving the way that maybe a drug addict would feel the first time they found their drug.
Well, what's the log line for the book? Like, what's the 2-sentence version?
It is a collection that introduces the universe of the ghoul. There is a ghoul king who is worried about his power being usurped. And the characters and the plot, I should probably just shut up now because I'm going to sound like a drooling groupie, but it's, I love it.
Are creatures the kind of horror that you're drawn to? Because like with Lovecraft, and then you're mentioning this, and I've read some of Amden Bog. I think that's your most recent book.
Yes.
Starts out with a creature story. Is that where you live? Is that your like niche?
Yeah, I like the element in fantasy, which you could say is horror fantasy, and it's this ambiguous area. Is it weird fiction? Is it horror fantasy? But I will say I genuinely like otherworldly horror. The only contemporary colloquial horror I generally read is Stephen King or Caitlin Karen.
My all-time favorite book about grief and loss is Lisey's Story by Stephen King. I read it in college and couldn't put it down. After I finished it, I got the audiobook and listened to the audiobook. Lisey is left behind after her husband dies. We pick up with her 2 years later, and she's gone through all of his notes. He was a prolific writer, a successful writer. And as she's going through, she realizes that there's this very real fantasy world that he would go into where he would get his inspiration. I think it's called Booyah Moon. If you stay there too long, there are creatures there that will devour you. And so it's kind of this part fantasy, part very stark reality of dealing with loss. And then the fantasy kind of mirrors this really healthy thing to face your grief head on, but it can also be dangerous.
What is the name of that book? I got to write that down. That sounds awesome.
It's Lisey's Story. And it's got a really cool, if you find the hardcover, it's got a really cool reveal of the fantasy world when you take the book jacket off.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that.
Did you ever see the movie Best Years of Our Lives?
I haven't.
Did you see it, Josh?
No. I'll watch it before.
You were assigned. This was your assignment.
I'll watch it.
You're supposed to watch it.
I'll watch it for next week.
I'm writing it down. What's it called again?
It's called Best Years of Our Lives. And it's a movie that was made. It's like post World War II. So these three guys come back. These three vets are coming back to like a small town. And one has lost his arms. And he's got like basically hooks for hands. And so he's got to adjust. But his wife also has to be like, this is now my husband. And then also the town, who's like waving their flags and like, they're returning. Here you go. Oh, wait a second. They're seeing this for the first, and they're like realizing like, this is very bad. And I think it's one of the first movies that shows like the horrors of war and also how you deal with it and like the grief and everything that goes on with it.
They had said that Frankenstein, one of the reasons the book was such a success is because World War I had ended and there were so many maimed Brits walking around the streets that the character Frankenstein, who was at a minimum, you could say visibly disfigured, to say the very least, allowed some sort of like cathartic, I don't know what you would say next, cathartic interpretation, expression. I don't know. It resonated into the British consciousness in a very therapeutic way. They could say, oh, this is a monster. And then now these people aren't, because it was so shocking for them to see these things. And they didn't have an outlet. They didn't want to say these things about these people, but deep down, they were mortified to see these maimed young people.
We got to wrap up, unfortunately, but I do have one more question
fun.
Yeah, I know. I could go. We say this at the end of every episode, basically, is that we could just talk for another like 5 hours. And maybe after we stop recording, we will. I did have one question that is unrelated to loss, but I did want to ask it because it has to do with something I want to bring up in a later episode. In horror, I feel like as writers often stick to a nuclear family or relationship and then build the interesting stuff around that. The idea of like, okay, take normal life and then we'll build the interesting stuff around it. And it's easier to just take that like 1950s version of a family. But in 2021, as we continue to progress as a society and embrace the diversity of our fellow humans, that normal life is a lot more interesting. So in Amden Bog, I noticed early in the first story, our main female character ends up having a sexual relationship with another woman, which when I read it felt exactly like what should be happening in that moment. It was just written like any other coming of age moment. It felt, for the sake of this question, normal, as it should. So can you talk about how that ended up being that way in the book and the importance of diversity and inclusivity in horror, and why it's important to kind of break out of the normalities that we've had set for like so many years?
I really haven't done this intentionally, but I guess you could say I do use the nuclear family as a backdrop for the way life could have been, but none of them have ever had it. Most of my characters start off, their status quo is at a sense of loss. They usually are an only child to only one parent. They're quite abandoned. There's another book I have called Necromancer's Will, where one of the larger characters is abandoned at birth and grows up in a very brutal orphanage. Maybe it's because our society does deem the 1950s nuclear family as how it should be. It is very useful in darker work to deprive characters of that. Chuck Palahniuk talks about it as a sort of a way to cheat to get people to sympathize with otherwise unsympathetic characters. And I suppose that might be one of the reasons that I do it. Yeah. As far as why Matina had a lesbian experience, I hate to sound like hokey. This is something like an 8th grader would say if they wrote a cool story, that like they just saw it that way, but it really did progress that way. And once I saw it progressing that way, I wanted to consult similar literature to get a feel for how to do it justice, to where it's not a straight dude perving out. I didn't want the writer to be there. I wanted it to be these two characters who were in a believable moment. So,
yeah, and it very much came across that way. I mean, like I said, it didn't. I didn't think twice about it until I was starting to form questions for our interview, and I love that because it does happen that way sometimes, where you're just writing and your mind takes a path and you explore it as if you're living that moment as that character. So thanks for talking about that. I was just genuinely curious. And Cody, I feel like we need to do like a whole month about gender and sexuality and phobias and horror. We could probably do that in June for Pride Month or something. Find some guests who are not straight white dudes, just having ideas. Right. Yeah. But yeah, David, thanks so much. What do you have coming up? What's next on the agenda for David?
Well, I'm actually working on a short story called Black Magic Summer, which takes place in the same world as Amden Bog.
And then to get like updates or like here it is, you gotta throw out like the social media stuff.
It is the times we live in. First, if anybody is interested in my dark military ramblings, which I assure you are transgressive and are not jingoistic and go against the grain of that propaganda that you were referring, which appears in every generation. There's a war. It's so big in the global war on terror, it's ridiculous. So right there. No Joy by David Rose, not of Schitt's Creek, but I'm not even going to go there. And this one, my friends, the glossy Amden Bog. And you can find me and them through links on Amazon, through Instagram and Twitter. Twitter is David Rose Author, and Instagram is David Rose, bookended by way too many dashes. Yes. So.
And you're approachable. We connected over Instagram. That's how we met, which is awesome. The age we live in. Well, I can't thank you enough for talking to us about loss and grief and making it fun and being open and vulnerable. And yeah, I'm looking forward to reading more of your stories.
Thank you guys sincerely for having me on. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for your service, and God bless you.
Thank you, guys.
Next week, Cody and I will be talking about the other side of loss, the funny things that happen in the wake of death. It's going to be an awesome episode. We'll see you then. Roll credits. Haunting Season was created by me, Joshua Sterling Bragg.
Produced by Greg Holdsman and Jessica Richmond.
And executive produced by Matt Geelan, Patrick James Lynch, and Ryan Geelan.
And is a joint production of Believe Limited and Matt Geelan.
This episode was written and hosted by Cody Dugan and Joshua Sterling Bragg.
It was edited by Colby Crow.
And select music in this episode was made exclusively for the podcast by North Innsbruck.
If you like our show, please subscribe on your favorite platform.
We have a video version of the show on YouTube and Facebook, and audio versions on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever else you listen to podcasts. Was that good? Oh boy.